we always leave Helena in terrible situations. Just making sure it's set. I do like live streaming, and I have this software. I just want to make sure it kicks in, which it has. I can stream to Facebook and YouTube at the same time. Also something called Twitch, which I haven't done that much with, admittedly, so I don't really know. But I know YouTube, I know Facebook, and I have a channel on YouTube, so you can check it out there. Tell your friends, Phoenix and the Falcon, support me. Buy a copy. But here I am, telling you the story for just because it's fun. So they're on their move. Attila is taking the troops onward and upward. Chapter 22. At least 2,000 horsemen undulated across the steppe, inexorable as an ocean wave, ceaseless and steady. The sweet fragrance of crushed grass mingled with the pungent odor of sweat in the air. Lena held fast to Sorel's mane, afraid of being trampled by the flashing hooves. Riding alongside, Valimir was preoccupied, his face austere. She passed the morning in silence. Her thoughts sustained her, cloaking her fear. Most of the women, along with servants and slaves, followed with the pack animals. Except for an occasional curious glance, no one paid her much attention. She was relieved that the novelty of Valimir's marriage was becoming old news. As she glanced at Attila astride his black stallion, he effortlessly dominated the men, drawing all eyes and casting the rest of his world into shadow. She was grateful to be obscured by his presence. He shouted a terse command, signaling a halt, and gathered his war leaders around him. With a wave of his arm, Attila motioned Ishiai to join the select group. Encircled by this select company, she stared at the ground, hoping to escape notice. An earnest discussion between the men ensued in Hunnic. She did not understand a word. When finished, the men broke apart with guttural shouts. Inevitably, the sound sent chills up her back. As the tribe resumed its journey, Helena studied the sun. Attila had altered their course to a more southwesterly direction, skirting Persia's borders. Helena wondered if he planned to avoid the southern tip of the Ural Mountains. The range folded gradually into the plains. The terrain was hilly, with narrow valleys perfect for ambush, which would diminish Attila's advantage in size. In the open, the only threat to the Huns would be a Roman legion or a Persian imperial command. Curious, she asked Valimir about it. He looked at her coolly, with his eyebrows raised, and apparently surprised by her grasp of strategy. His answer was an abrupt nod. "Where's Thudomir?" she asked, realizing that she had yet to see him since his betrayal. "Somewhere, who knows," Valimir said, unconcerned. "Doesn't he usually ride with me?" "Ride with you?" she asked. "Yes, but he's apparently avoiding me." This news brought her no comfort. Seeing her face, Valimir laughed. "Don't worry, he'll be back when he wants something." Attila overheard the last part of their conversation. "Thudomir, you mean?" "Who else? At least you're fond of him. I can't say the same for mine." "Blida," Valimir said, his words trailing away to nothingness. "Exactly. An idiot. So of course Rugvilla keeps him close, listening to his drivel, while he sends me first to Rome, then to the east, hoping I'll never come back." Helena listened, remembering the rumors about Attila's older brother. He was said to be a simpleton. "Perhaps King Rugvilla wanted your eyes and ears in Rome," Valimir said. Attila laughed with malice. "No, friend, he wants me far away, preferring the advice of fools. Meanwhile, against tradition, he allows our people to become Roman mercenaries. I promise you, Valimir, one way or the other, that will change." Believing him, Helena shivered. She retreated to the sanctuary of her own thoughts. The two men ceased raising their voices against the dust, the wind, and the rumble of pounding hoofs. As the sun passed midday, Valdemar asked her if she wanted to rest in the wagon. She shook her head. At last the setting sun transformed the sky into a quiet spectacle of orange and purple. Attila raised his arm, and his throat reverberated with a deep roar. The cry passed through the tribe, bringing the army to a halt in moments. Valdemar took his leave of Attila, impatient to find Karachapan and Reese. They turned away. Attila said, "Break bread with me when you're settled. As you wish. Helena will not join us." Attila frowned, not masking his irritation. "Why? See for yourself. She's exhausted." Feeling Attila's eyes on her, Helena was too numb to care. "Very well," Attila said. "Come to me when you can." Then Valdemar's arms were around her, lifting her from Sorel to Hassan. Leaning against him, she struggled to stay awake. Valdemar whispered in her ear, "You're stubborn, Helena, but you did well." A smile played across her lips. Once they were reunited with Karachapan and Reese, Valdemar helped them prepare their campsite. Lena wanted to help, but she was beyond exhaustion. She must have drifted off to sleep. When she awoke, it was night. The fire burned brightly in a small hearth, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the tent. She was alone. Ravenous with hunger, she sat up quickly and found food left for her near the fire. As she ate, Helena listened, hearing the occasional whinny of a horse, a few men laughing in the distance, but mostly the wind. The sound reminded her of Kansvar's village, where she had spent hours letting her thoughts and dreams mingle with the steady breeze, as if it could take her home. Cupping her chin in her hands, she stared at the fire and inadvertently stirred her pool of memories. With intense clarity, she remembered a summer's day in Constantinople. She had been 11, sitting with her father by the marble fountain in the courtyard of the spacious stone house, laughing when a gust of wind coated them in fine droplets of spray. "Our spirits are as drops of water, Helena, separate yet part of the whole," he had said. "What do you mean, grandfather?" He took her hands in his, smiling with his blue eyes. "Someday I'll become the light. I won't be with you anymore." Tears stung her eyes. "You'll never die." He laughed. "Our bodies die, but not our spirits. They are immortal. When the day comes that I am gone, don't deny my birthright by grieving too long. We are eternal, one with God. In time we must shed our bodies and go home to him until we return for the next lessons on the earthly plane. Though you'll miss me, I'll be with you always, watching over you and loving you as my own." For all these years she had forgotten, her 11-year-old mind not comprehending his words. Now she did. Mourning would not bring back Mikhail or her grandfather. Only the passage of years would diminish the fierce pain. With a sharp intake of breath, she began to accept that their spirits had not died, only their bodies, their shells. She sensed the possibility of remembering them with joy, unblemished by sadness, and felt a peace that transcended words. Time passed, stretching deeper into night. Restless, she stood and wondered why Valdemar was taking so long. She wanted to look outside, but hesitated, remembering that morning in Grelia. She busied herself around the tent, trying to be useful. Valdemar finally returned. Her heart leapt, yet her relief was offset by irritability, when she tried to keep it to herself. "You're awake," he said. "Where have you been?" she asked, despising herself for sounding like a shrew, but was unable to stop. She knew he had been with Attila, but the thought of him with 3 other women lingered, fouling her with jealousy. "With Attila," he said, his face tightening into a frown. He filled the tent with his presence. She found herself beside him, surrendering to the need to be close. "I missed you," she said, but did not reach for him. His smile warmed her heart. "It was a joy to return to my tent and find you waiting." His kiss was tender on her lips. Drawing her into him, she fled from it, from the feelings that it invoked by pulling her mouth away. Though wanting his embrace, she was rigid with fear. The wind whispered to her, beckoning her out into the night. A longing to see the stars filled her, a sight usually denied the women in the cloistered life of Kansbar's house. "Are the stars bright tonight?" she asked, not looking at him. "See for yourself, Alina." Taking her by the hand, he led her outside. The sky was black and free of clouds. The stars blazed in the fall air. The moon was a white sliver, radiantly shining. "It's beautiful," she said in a hushed voice. He put his arm around her shoulders, sharing the moment in silence. A horse whinnied. Helena remembered her mare. "How's Sorrel?" "She's not used to working all day." "She's quiet," he said, chuckling. "Finally tired." "And you, Valamir, are you tired after being with Attila?" No one could match his energy. He kept talking and pacing, and I was impatient to be gone and to be with you. "I could be with you always," she said, wanting to tell him more, but the words would not come. He hugged her, but she took care not to press against his wound. "Valamir," she said, and then hesitated. "What does the symbol mean that you cut in your chest?" "You don't know?" "Only what I heard Thudamir say. It's the insignia of remembrance, but also loyalty, prized above all others by the Brotherhood of Mithras. When I see it, I'll think of you." "I don't think you did it for me, but to bypass my anger. If you give me time, I would have forgiven you." His voice was quiet. His laugh was quiet. "Maybe I didn't want to leave it to chance." Returning inside, they lay on the bed pad in each other's arms. For the first time, Lena felt restless. Her longing for him superseded her fear. He kissed her, his hand cradling her face. "Until my wound heals, I won't press you to be my true wife. By then, you'll know what you want," he said, speaking as if he could read her mind. In the darkness, her eyes filled with tears. In such a short time, she needed him as much as she yearned for the night sky, the stars, and the sight of a horse at play. He had become intrinsic to her being and to her heart. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. The words wrung from her soul. "I want to be your wife, Valamir. I can't imagine life without you, but I'm afraid. Before, with Kansbar, it was so painful. I want to forget and put it in the past, but I can't. It stays me like a curse, spoiling my love." "Lena," he said, stroking her hair and kissing her brow, "I'll never give you pain. But should we become one, the shaman's words would bind us for life." "What are you saying?" she asked. "The shaman has brought our spirits together. We bet to complete the ceremony. Should we complete the union? Our destinies would join. I could never take you home." Her breath was a sigh. "You are my home, after all that I ever wanted in a husband. But living with Huns, I don't know." And he smiled. "Well, once we return, you'll be with my people. Ostrogoths are fighters, a strong nation. But we do have houses with roofs overhead." She laughed, holding him tight, unwilling to let him go. "Will you marry me, Helena, this time with your heart?" As she started to speak, he laid his finger across her mouth. "Shh, wait. Tell me when I can come to you whole, unblemished by a wound." His lips brushed her brow once again, and he fell into deep and immediate sleep. Wide awake, Helena watched him in the firelight. His blonde hair was burnished gold by the flames, his profile lined by the light. With a timid kiss, she touched his mouth. Though his eyes did not open, his arms embraced her. Yet he slept on. In the morning, the camp readied for the day's journey. Helena studied Valamir covertly. She searched for flaws, needed them to counter the impulses of her heart. It was hopeless. Her grievances seemed petty and contrived, useless, against the fabric of her growing feelings for him. She tried to help while Valamir, Kratapan, and Reese packed away the tents. Kratapan shooed her away. Feeling in the way, her thoughts turned inward. Since childhood, sadness ached within her, silent, always waiting. Even in Constantinople she had felt different, unworthy of her grandfather's love. He had cherished her and provided every material comfort. He had never acknowledged her Thracian mother, not once mentioning her by name, and denying half of Helena as if she were unclean. Through servants' gossip, she knew that her father had loved her mother, defying Beluchistan by taking her as his bride. After her death from childhood, Helena's father had left Constantinople, seeking distraction from his loss, committing himself to service in the Persian imperial guard. Helena agreed with her grandfather's philosophy that each lifetime contained many lessons. This belief was a hard master, demanding consistent moral strength and willingness to shoulder ultimate responsibility. The loss of Mikhail continued to haunt her. She looked for something to do, anything to escape her unrelenting thoughts. Valimir, Kratapan, and Reese had been efficient. They were all but finished with the morning's packing. She walked to the horses, still tethered, but fully ready for the day. Paisiel whinnied, eager for a treat. As always, he lightened her heart. She smiled and scratched his neck, wishing he were young enough to carry that entire day. Surprised by tears, she buried her face in his mane. She tried to accept her grandfather's message in her dream, to find joy in her memories, to ease the pain. It was beyond difficult. For the second time, her life had been turned upside down, and her reality ripped to shreds. Sometimes, when she awoke, it was hard to remember where she was. The thought of Constantinople and her grandfather's house filled with colorful mosaic floors and the cheerful sound of the fountain. She thought of Constantinople and her grandfather's house. Without her grandfather's lively presence, it was only a building, its walls made of solid stone, cold and unfeeling. Her father's face, so like her grandfather's, floated in her mind. He was a stranger. She wondered if he even knew that she was missing. She assumed her reward had been offered by John, the steward of the house, in her grandfather's name. At the thought of John, she smiled. He had always been kind to her. Somehow, she vowed to herself she would find a way to send word of her whereabouts. As she combed Paisiel's mane, the image of Kansbar's village reared itself in her mind's eye. She studied the sky, not wanting to visualize the houses charred beyond recognition and the bodies left for the birds. Her eyes drifted downward, back to earth, and she saw the multitude of Huns. Their talent for cruelty hung over her head like a descending point of a sword. Ludmilla, Kansbar's first wife, would have told her to make the best of a bad lot. Her sensible advice had been unstinting and constant. A woman must accept and be obedient to her place in the world. For Helena, docility had been a mask, worn as a dress, but one size too small, stifling and constraining. In the past, she had tried to follow Ludmilla's example, to make her lot bearable, yet she had never been able to quiet her inner voice, screaming in silence against acceptance of a life she so bitterly despised. With a spark of malice, Helena noted that Ludmilla's methods had not helped her in the end. Quickly, she was shamed by the thought. She shook her head, knowing she'd never qualify as a good wife, one who was compliant and tractable. Suddenly she laughed out loud, savoring her freedom from spending her days forever playing a role. Valimir accepted her, allowing her the liberty to be herself. His price was high. To be with him, she had to live with Huns. Yet in either the Roman or Persian Empire, she would have had no voice in her marriage. Without her grandfather to intercede, his eldest male relative had the right to inter her in a mausoleum of a loveless matrimony, her very body to be put into the service of her father's line. Her choice was clear. She gave Paisiel one last pat and untied Sorel. Thinking of Valimir, she hummed a lilting tune. The mare breathed gently on Helena's face, making her smile. She stroked the animal's muzzle and scratched behind her pointed ears. Your touch looks sweet, a man's voice startling her. Her hand on her knife, Helena reeled to face the intruder. It was only Thudamir, looking hesitant despite his comment. His large bay horse, sturdy enough to carry a man his size, was restive and eager to be off. He set off. She ignored his disconcerting words. Good morning, Thudamir. And to you, fair sister-in-law. With deliberate speed, Valimir joined them, greeting his brother with a playful tap on the bay's rump, making the horse jump. The ploy was unsuccessful. Thudemir's seat was unshakable, immune to the unexpected. He brought his horse under control and grinned to his brother. Valimir's eyes twinkled. You ride with us today? Thudemir shrugged. Might as well. Good, said Valimir. Helena, Karatapan wants to see your hand. Helena wondered about the dressing covering Valimir's wound, but was reluctant to mention it in front of Thudemir. She refused to look at him. Valimir might have forgiven his brother for the role he had played with Attila, but Helena could barely stand to be near him. Yet, as Karatapan examined her hand, she felt safe. Under the bright sun, her anxieties about the curses and dark forces seemed remote and implausible. She set aside her anger at Thudemir for the moment. His betrayal was petty and childish compared to the horrific murder of her son. As she thought of her words to Grelia, she felt chilled even in full daylight. She was confused by how they had erupted from her soul with the force of a dark, coursing river. Distressed, she sought Karatapan's eyes. As if for protection, she hastily drew the sign of light across her heart. Valimir thinks I should speak to the shaman. Could he help me? Karatapan looked at the horizon and back at her. The shaman understands the earth and its magic, seeing the invisible threads of our relationship to it and each other. He'll not betray any trust you place in him, but I don't know if he'll be able to help you. This legacy from your grandfather, it's old, beyond time. But see what he can offer. Her disappointment was keen. She wanted Karatapan to tell her that everything would be fine, that she should stop worrying and that the shaman would have the answer. He had not. Watching him fasten a fresh bandage around her hand, she felt despair. She prayed, focusing her attention within her heart. In silence, her inner voice reverberated within her being, speaking quietly within the pool that was her essence. Helena, the darkness hides behind shadows. Once you see it truly, its power is lost. Compared to the light, is nothing. Be not afraid. Comforted, Helena inwardly sighed. Karatapan smiled at her, his wise eyes full of affection. Next, he said to Valimir. As Valimir turned, Helena could have sworn she saw a moment's fear cloud his face. In a stern voice, she whispered to Karatapan, Be gentle with him. Karatapan laughed. I always am. He just hates being poked and prodded. Songs have been sung about his bravery in battle, but afterwards, when his body takes his due, he reconsiders his rashness. Stung by the image of Valimir fighting sword to sword, Lena's throat became dry. Does he get hurt often? Just a scratch here and there, Valimir said, overhearing the end of their conversation. She whirled around. You and your brother walk like cats. He smiled tenderly. A light step is a weapon. As he sat beside Karatapan, his face hardened with resignation. Do your worst. Helena looked away. Afterward, Valimir and Helena mounted, ready to leave Karatapan and Rhys with a wagon. Rhys wore sturdy leather clothing, his once bare feet encased by old but patched boots. With a wry smile, Helena acknowledged Karatapan's talent for procurement. As if by magic, he acquired whatever was needed. Their horses struck out at a canter, with Thudemir riding alongside his brother, but was uncharacteristically silent. When they reached the center of the multitude, Attila greeted them with a shout. We ride, Valimir! His arm rose with his fist clenched, signaling his men. They chanted his name, beating the sky with their frenzy. Keeping their horses to a trot, they cleared the wagons before allowing their mounts to spring forward into a gallop. Singing, the men repeated Attila's name, punctuating their cries with grisly howls. Sensing the tribe's hunger for battle, Helena prayed that no one would cross their path that day. The next 10 days passed without incident. The steppes were desolate, more suited to nomadic sheep herders than military patrols. The Huns met no inhabitants. The low rumble of many horses' hooves would act as a warning for anyone to hide. The wind blew more chill, announcing the threshold of winter. Their progress was significant. Already they were less than 2 days from the Caspian Sea. In 10 days they had covered a distance that had taken her grandfather's caravan almost a month to travel. As usual, Attila invited Valimir and Helena to share his meal. She was tired of his probing eyes, his sharp questions, and his need to know everything. Tonight, Attila settled down to business. The men are restive, Valimir. They need action. Helena could not help but think that there had been nothing but incessant movement. What do you plan? Valimir asked. Attila was nonchalant. We're close to the northern silk route. Helena cringed inwardly. She remembered traveling in the same track with her grandfather. Though their bodyguard was strong, close to 40 men, they would have been nothing against a force of Attila's size. Not for the first time, Helena wondered why her grandfather had undertaken the risky journey. Yet his will had been indomitable, thwarted only by death. The men would be happy to bring home more bounty, Valimir said, but I've no interest in innocent blood. What do you mean? Let any men or soldiers take their chance with us, but leave the women and children alone. Helena's throat pulsed. And you, Helena, what do you think? Attila asked. His voice was smooth as a coiled snake's skin. Her voice betrayed her, crackling with emotion. Anyone who takes a child's life is a murderer, cursed by God for all time, she whispered. Attila laughed at her suppressed outburst. I'd begun to wonder if you'd lost your tongue. The gods forbid, but to my relief, I see that my concern was misplaced. I meant what I said, Helena said, her voice low with fervor. And what do you think your friends the Romans? And do you think your friends the Romans spare children when they travel north into our lands? The Romans are no one's friend, Helena retorted. You, of all people, should know that. Valimir placed his hand on her wrist, cautioning her. But Attila persisted, undeterred by Valimir's concern. Why should I spare an enemy's children, leaving them to grow into men? She wanted to snarl. People on the silk route aren't your enemies. They're your prey. Rome's your adversary, not some poor merchant who has the misfortune to be in your way. Attila's mouth twisted up with repressed laughter. Your eloquence has moved me. She shook her head. I've amused you, that's all. Well, that's true, but should the caravan spill none of our blood, their lives will be spared. That is my custom. What if one hothead plays the fool? She asked, thinking of Ivan. Who could say, Helena? Sickened, she was silent. Later, returning with Valimir to their tent, Helena said, I hate him. He's a monster. Most people are deep inside. Well, not everyone has to prove it every day, she said, holding her close. Attila likes to tease you. He enjoys your passion. Let tomorrow wait. We'll see soon enough what it brings. As they lay side by side, he stared at her. Restraining himself, he only kissed her cheek. Abruptly turned away and promptly fell asleep. Lena's dreams took her back to the village and to the women's screams. Red with blood, children cried. The stench of decaying flesh was palpable. Suddenly, Grelia bore down on her, sword in hand. She awoke with a start. Shivering, she edged closer to Valimir and his warmth. Closing her eyes, searching for sleep, but it eluded her. Her terror remained, growing in the silence of the night. To escape it, she wanted to rouse Valimir. He slumbered deeply, and she did not have the heart to wake him. She thought of her father and wondered what he would say to the discovery of his daughter riding with Huns. Would he care? Did he even remember her face? Had he remarried? In truth, when she thought of him, she saw her grandfather, only younger, with blue eyes, framed by dark curly hair. Was her father any different than the Romans or any fighting man? His creed was the soldiers. His standard was the Persian Empire. Yet she missed belonging to a family, even her father's. Struggling against the unexpected longing, she cried silently until her eyes were dry. The smoke from the fire spiraled into the opening above. As she looked upward, she saw the approach of dawn, streaking the sky with pink. She thought of rising, but was too comfortable and warm to move. Moments later, it seemed, Valimir touched her shoulder. "Wake up! The tent must come down." Opening her eyes, she saw his face and smiled. He laughed. "You're beautiful, Helena." Disagreeing, she shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. He caressed her cheek and her hair and kissed her gently on the lips. "Hurry, get dressed. I'll be back. I should have woken you earlier, but you looked too spent to disturb." When he left her, the tent felt empty and abandoned. Wanting to join him outside, Helena briskly prepared to meet the day. And that's chapter 22. So, needless to say, Helena, she feels a little conflicted, as we would say in our time. But you got to figure, look at what's happening. It's understandable. I feel badly for Helena. I've been very hard on her. But it's the way I saw it, and, I write it. This characters sort of write the book, and that's how it went for me with her. But